Now, in Turkey, there has been resistance to Prime Minister Erdogan's government. It started as a simple protest at Gezi Park about what some characterize as an environmental issue. It was one of the few remaining green areas in Istanbul, and there was going to be a mall built on top of it. And now it has spread. There are now 200 some odd demonstrations in 67 cities and towns around Turkey. And in fact, it has spread to many different parts of the world in support and alliance with Occupy Gezi and all the demonstrators who are across the political spectrum in Turkey. There has been protests in the United States, Europe, and all around the world. Now, Prime Minister Erdogan apparently still not understanding the significance of the protests and trying to diminish their importance, says that he blames the opposition party for inciting the crowd, saying, hey, look, it's just the opposition party doing this, not a big deal, in other words, a political movement. And they called the crowd, quote, a few looters. So you've got a couple 100,000 people out there, some of them getting hit with tear gas. That would appear to be more than a few people, and obviously their purpose is not to loot. Now, the police reaction has been grossly overreaction, as you can see with some of the clips from RT there, some people getting seriously hurt, and a 20-year-old unfortunately was killed when run over by a vehicle in the protests as well. And I actually want to show you a clip now of one of the protesters getting hit with tear gas canister directly. Let's take a look at that. So as you're seeing the protest here, you will see that he is aimed at and hit directly right there. And the cop who hit him seems to be rather excited and flaunting it. Now remember, you're not supposed to be firing the tear gas at the protesters, and in fact that's part of the reason why these protests have become so gigantic, because of the police overreaction. Now, it's interesting, of course, because this goes to the heart of whether Erdogan has been, quote-unquote, authoritarian. Now remember, this is not the Arab Spring in the sense that those were to overthrow dictators. Erdogan was democratically elected. He's been in office for 10 years and has won at times rather easily. And now he says these guys are a minority. Now I'll get to that in a second. But, you know, it's on the issue of democracy. King Abdullah of Jordan said something very interesting once to the Atlantic. He said, Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey is an authoritarian who views democracy as a bus ride. As in, once I get to my stop, I'm getting off. Now that's a very scary thing to say. Now, whether Erdogan actually said that to King Abdullah is a different question, or it just might be King Abdullah's interpretation of Erdogan. Either way, it's disconcerting and what, of course, secular Turks are really worried about. Now, when you get to the reaction of Erdogan to the protesters, he said, if this is about holding meetings, if this is a social movement, where they gather 20, I will get up and gather 200,000 people. Where they gather 100,000, I will bring together 1 million from my party. Now, what he's trying to get at there is that my party is larger than yours, and so I can bring these folks out and we can, you know, basically outgun you in a democracy, okay? Now, the reality is that was seen as threatening by a lot of people, saying, oh, are you going to bring out your supporters and have us clash in the streets? That's what people are concerned about. Now, look, our presidents here in the United States, whether they mean it or not, after an election, will turn around and say, I'm not just, for example, with President Obama, I'm not just the president of the Democrats, or I'm not just the president of the people who voted for me, I'm the president of the whole United States of America. So I would hope that the Prime Minister of Turkey would feel the same way, even of the protesters. I am your Prime Minister. I am your representative, so I want to hear what you have to say. It certainly hasn't felt that way in these protests. And now, when talking specifically about the protesters, it got honestly a little uglier. Erdogan said, we shall be discussing these with them and we'll be following up, talking about how he has his intelligence agencies looking into the protesters. And he says, in fact, we will also settle accounts with them. Now, if you think that doesn't sound scary, you're not paying attention. It's supposed to sound scary. Now, you don't want the Prime Minister in a democracy to saying, I will be looking into the protesters and settling accounts with them. That is very disconcerting. Now, he goes on to say, this is a protest organized by extremist elements. We will not give away anything to those who live arm in arm with terrorism. Now, here we go again. Now, this is unfortunately what the United States has taught the rest of the world, which is if anyone opposes you politically, just call them a terrorist. Doesn't matter what they actually did. These are incredibly peaceful demonstrations. The only time, according to the reporters on the scenes, that anything has gotten violent is when the police come in and start shooting those tear gas canisters, sometimes directly at people, as you saw, sometimes from helicopters, sometimes into crowded buildings. So when you have these peaceful protesters who have a legitimate beef with the government being characterized as extremists and terrorists and looters, these are not positive words coming out of the Prime Minister, to say the least. He then blames also social media. Now look, this is what every leader who's trying to suppress a certain percentage of his population says. Oh, it's not my fault, it's the fault of social media. You have to understand what social media is simply a collection of people. Some you might disagree with, and some who have good points. That's not how Erdogan sees it. He says, there is a problem called Twitter right now, and you can find every kind of lie there. Oh, I see, that's what Twitter's for. It's just for lies. Or perhaps it's reporting that you didn't want out there, and unfortunately a lot of Turkish television has been very intimidated by Erdogan's government. But you can't intimidate the people. That's why they're on Twitter, they're on social media. You can't do it to all of them, and that's what bothers you. And that's why you say, oh, there's lies on Twitter. By the way, are there some lies on Twitter? Of course! It's just social media. But is it all lies? Of course not! The great majority of tweets on this issue are simply sending pictures, factual accounts, sometimes videos. And that's what bothers people who don't want a free press in their country. He, going broader, just outside of Twitter, he says the thing that is called social media is the biggest trouble for society right now. No, no, no. It's the biggest trouble for the government that is not representing its people. It is an outlet for society. That is obvious. Now, one thing that I agree with Prime Minister Erdogan on this case is, he says, quote, it's entirely ideological when referring to the protests. Well, I think there's great truth in that. You see, it isn't just about whether a park gets mowed over and has a mall built on it or a mosque built on it, and part of the proposal, or a recreation of an old-style Ottoman barracks, perfect for Erdogan. He makes money off or some friends of the government might make money off of the mall. He brings in a mosque because he's more of a fundamentalist believer in Islam. And he appears to, according to the protesters, and they have a good point here, to fancy himself a bit of a sultan. He's been in power, and this happens to people in power all the time. They stay too long, and then they think they can't be wrong. So for him to recreate an Ottoman barracks is perfect. I mean, he was in Istanbul, he was staying in an old Ottoman palace as the troubles began. The symbolism is very strong. But that's exactly right. This isn't just an environmental movement. This isn't just an Occupy movement. It is ideological, and the ideology is that Turkey is a secular country. Since its founding, the Republic of Turkey has always been secular. It has been one of the most secular countries in the world, and deeply proud of it. The founder of Turkey, Ataturk, did not set up a caliphate. He took down a caliphate. It's not like he wasn't strong. It's not like he didn't know what he was doing. That was very much on purpose. And apparently some current Muslim politicians are not happy about that. Well, that's what Turkey is. If you want a Muslim government that is dictated by your interpretation of the Quran, as opposed to a republic, there are plenty of such countries. Saudi Arabia, there's Iran, but it is not Turkey. Now, some of the rules that Erdogan has proposed is an alcohol sale ban between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. You wonder why people are in the streets? Try to get the Turks to stop drinking. And warnings about immodest behavior in public. If there's kissing in public, they're saying that they might crack down on that. Now, Turkey can be described as an Asian country, a European country, a Middle Eastern country, but it's also a Mediterranean country. You're going to try to get a Mediterranean people to stop drinking and being passionate in public. Good luck to you. What's going to happen instead is hundreds of thousands of people in the streets. And all the rest of the people in the buildings in Izmir, Istanbul, Ankara, and all the other cities, banging pots and pans, people honking their horns as they drive their cars, flickering lights on and off, all to say, we're with the protesters. You still think that this is a bunch of looters, extremists? There's some chance the government is not paying attention. Turkey is not Iran. We don't punish people for immodest behavior in public. Erdogan says about the protesters, I want them to know that I want these restrictions for the sake of their health. Whoever drinks alcohol is an alcoholic. Said like a true fundamentalist. That is simply not true. A lot of people drink alcohol and are not alcoholics. They're human beings. They're Turks. They drink rakı. Sometimes they drink beer. And they're perfectly fine. Not everybody who drinks alcohol is an alcoholic. That is a fundamentalist view of looking at things. It's black and white. You either follow my dictates, my interpretation of my religion, or you hit the road. Well, that's not how a democracy is supposed to work, and certainly not how Turkey is supposed to work. Now, he does have a point here. He does say, quote, every 4 years we hold elections and this nation makes its choice. Those who have a problem with government's policies can express their opinions within the framework of law and democracy. Now, I agree with that. I really do. And I don't like people characterizing this as an uprising against a dictator. He's not a dictator. He was duly elected. And there are a lot of people in Turkey who do agree with him. And we have to be respectful of their opinions as well. And they have expressed that through the ballot box. Now, there are elections coming up next year and the year after in Turkey. If you're really angry with the Erdogan government, well, you should go ahead and hit that ballot box. Make sure you stand in line and vote your conscience, okay? Now, at the same time, just because you were democratically elected does not mean that everything you do is right. Does not mean that within your term you shouldn't listen to legitimate protesters who have real concerns as citizens of the country you represent. Apparently, the president of the country now understands that. President Abdullah Gül said, when we speak of democracy, of course, the will of the people is above all, but democracy does not mean elections alone. Very good point. He went on to say there can be nothing more natural for the expression of views, various situations, and objections through a variety of ways besides elections. Another very good point. And finally, he says, the views that are well-intentioned have been read, seen, and noted, and the messages have been received. Now, it's good to see someone in the Turkish government has received that message, and it's obviously a way that his party and the president himself are reaching out and saying, we don't all necessarily agree with the incredibly hard line that Erdogan has put down here. There are different thoughts here, and a lot of us understand and appreciate what the protesters are saying. Now, whether he means that or not, it is the right thing to say. It's politically right, it's right by policy, and I really hope he does mean it. And I really hope that he and the rest of the party sit down with Erdogan and say, hey, listen, remember, you represent all Turks. And you might also want to remind him, it is a secular country. And if he doesn't remember that, he's right. Next time around, there are elections. And elections do have consequences. Ne mutlu Türk'üm diyene.